There are some fights you can't win with muscle, and there are some walls that don't fall no matter how hard you push. But try telling that to a cowboy who's spent his whole life believing that a heavy hand and a loud voice can conquer anything on four legs. Inside the aged pine tack room of the Cross Iron Ranch, the air always carried the heavy, undeniable scent of oiled leather, dried sweat, and winter dust. But the men who walked into this room didn't come to admire the atmosphere. They came inevitably to stare at the back wall in silence. Hung from rusty iron nails driven deep into the timber was a row of snapped lead ropes, exactly 10 ropes in total. Some made of thick, braided cotton with their ends violently frayed, and others heavy-duty nylon, cleanly sheared by thousands of pounds of instantaneous, unstoppable force. Nobody hung them there out of cowboy pride, because Wade Garrison, the grizzled ranch foreman, kept them mounted as a grim, silent warning of 10 total failures for the 10 veteran cowboys who had dared to step into the heavy steel round pen with brimstone that year, only to come flying back over the rails before the job was ever finished, with one man even leaving a work boot buried deep in the mud because he was running for his life. Brimstone was a 7-year-old, 1,400-pound registered Charolais bull, pure white and heavily muscled, carrying the absolute best genetics on 30,000 acres of prime Montana land, his calves packing on beef faster and selling for a massive premium that funded the ranch's winter operations, while his breeding rights were valued at over $50,000 on paper alone. Yet inside a holding pen, he was an absolute monster who gave zero warnings, lacking the typical head drops, pawing, or guttural bellows of a normal hot-tempered bull, standing unnervingly still instead before exploding forward without any transition between standing and attacking, like a massive diesel machine throwing a switch that bypassed the middle gears entirely. This terrifying unpredictability is what makes the broken ropes on that wall represent so much more than mere physical danger, as they ultimately symbolize the complete and absolute failure of traditional, ego-driven masculinity where men rely solely on intimidation, volume, and brute force to dominate their surroundings. When a 1,400-pound animal shatters the carefully constructed confidence of seasoned men who think they can muscle their way through every obstacle, it establishes a brutal, high-stakes baseline for the entire ranch. The old aggressive ways of doing things are no longer working, and a new paradigm is desperately required. But the most profound threat to the survival of the Cross Iron Ranch wasn't the 1,400 pounds of lethal muscle pacing in the dirt. It was the sterile calculation happening inside an air-conditioned office where a cold spreadsheet was about to erase 3 generations of Montana legacy. The harsh reality of modern agriculture is that the greatest battles are rarely fought with ropes anymore, but in the suffocating friction between risk-averse, data-driven corporate management and the pride-based generational craftsmanship of the working class. Dr. Emmett Shaw's voice crackled through the speakerphone sitting on the massive oak desk, offering a clinical solution to dart the bull from a safe distance, hit him with a heavy sedative, perform the exam, and wake him up. However, Silas Vance, the 68-year-old owner of the sprawling empire, sat rigid behind his desk, rubbing a jaw that felt like tanned saddle leather before fiercely refusing. Silas understood that sedating a sire for routine pen work was a massive red flag on the animal's permanent veterinary record, an admission to every buyer that this genetic marvel was a liability that could not be handled by mortal men. Sitting across from him was Marcus Thorne, a corporate ranch manager wearing a sharply pressed shirt and wielding an ag business degree from Cornell, who viewed brimstone purely as an actuarial nightmare. Marcus tapped an expensive pen against his tablet, arguing that 10 handling failures had triggered the insurance carrier, exposing the ranch to millions in liability. He coldly demanded that Silas dart the bull, extract his genetics through artificial insemination, and sell him to a slaughterhouse. Marcus wasn't mathematically wrong, and Silas knew the corporate logic was sound. Yet selling brimstone meant surrendering the soul of the operation and admitting that the finest animal his family had ever produced was simply too much to handle. It tasted exactly like defeat. A bitter pill Silas was entirely unwilling to swallow, representing a devastating failure of authentic horsemanship, in a world increasingly dominated by profit margins. Staring out the window toward the snow-capped peaks, Silas stubbornly bought himself 30 days to figure out a solution to a problem that neither brute force nor calculated spreadsheets could hope to solve. But the answer to breaking a 1,400-pound deadlock wouldn't come from a louder cowboy or a smarter corporate spreadsheet. It would arrive quietly, in the form of a 26-year-old girl who knew exactly how to make a monster forget it was supposed to fight. When Clara Hayes pulled her battered pickup truck onto the Cross Iron Ranch, having driven 800 miles from a remote wild Mustang sanctuary in the unforgiving high deserts of Nevada, nobody expected her to be the solution to a problem that had broken 10 veteran men. Silas Vance hired her not because of a polished resume, but because he looked at her hands and saw the thick calluses that only come from years of stretching heavy barbed wire. For her first 2 weeks on the property, Clara was a ghost, doing her job flawlessly without uttering a boastful word. But every evening, just as the sun set, she did something that deeply unsettled the older ranch hands. Instead of trying to force her will on the massive white bull by yelling or waving sorting sticks like the men did, she walked down to Brimstone's round pen and stood completely silent, exactly 20 feet away from the thick metal rails. She didn't push him, attempt to establish predatory dominance, or demand his immediate respect. She simply became a non-threatening, immovable part of his environment. What the cowboys dismissed as strange, passive behavior was actually a masterful application of behavioral science, specifically the psychological principles of desensitization and habituation. By actively removing the expectation of a violent confrontation, Clara was systematically lowering the bull's surging cortisol levels, slowly rewiring his fight-or-flight response night after night. Her silent, unwavering vigil proved a profound truth that resonates far beyond the dirt boundaries of a Montana cattle ranch. In an increasingly loud, aggressive, and fast-paced world where everyone is constantly shouting for control, extreme patience and absolute stillness are often the most disruptive, and ultimately the most effective, tools you can ever wield. Yet mastering the profound power of silence was merely the psychological preparation for her true weapon. Because to capture a 1,400-pound beast that refused to be broken, this 26-year-old girl wasn't going to try to change the animal at all. She was going to fundamentally alter the physical reality of the ranch itself. On the morning of her 11th day, as the biting winter wind rattled the heavy tin roof of the main equipment barn, Clara finally stepped out of the shadows and confronted Silas Vance directly. She looked the weathered third-generation cattleman right in the eye and calmly explained that his veteran cowboys were failing so miserably because they were aggressively escalating a physical fight that the massive Charolais bull was genetically built to win every single time. Whenever the men applied direct pressure to force him down a straight, claustrophobic alleyway, they were triggering an explosive fight-or-flight response, effectively cornering a terrifying monster that possessed no reverse gear. Instead of trying to push the angry bull into a trap, Clara audaciously proposed completely redesigning the heavy steel holding pen, stripping away the straight fences and replacing them with a complex system of sweeping curved panels and blind corners. She intended to completely stop fighting the animal's aggressive nature and instead use Brimstone's own deeply ingrained survival instincts to guide him exactly where they needed him to go. In doing so, Clara was introducing the isolated Cross Iron Ranch to the revolutionary, real-world philosophy of low-stress livestock handling, a scientifically proven methodology pioneered by legendary American agricultural experts like Temple Grandin and Bud Williams. Clara explained the brilliant biological secret hidden behind her radical design. Prey animals possess wide-angle vision and naturally perceive straight, narrow alleys as highly dangerous dead ends, causing them to balk and violently panic. However, when faced with solid, curved walls, a cow's brain processes the continuous visual barrier as a safe, open path, tricking the animal into thinking it is smoothly escaping back to the safety of the herd. By relying on brilliant geometry rather than brute force, Clara was about to prove to the entire valley that true agricultural mastery requires working in absolute harmony with nature's hidden wiring. But But all the brilliant psychological theory in the world meant absolutely nothing if it couldn't stop 1,400 pounds of pure, unadulterated rage on a freezing Saturday morning, setting the stage for a climax that would permanently shatter the deeply entrenched egos of the Cross-Iron Ranch. For 3 days, Clara worked alone, hauling rusted panels from the boneyard to construct a curved turnback box out of salvaged scrap metal and old iron pipe. When exam day arrived, the atmosphere over the ranch was thick with suffocating tension, as Dr. Shaw's veterinary truck crunched up the driveway while Marcus Thorne stood on the wooden porch, harboring an arrogant smirk and expecting the young girl to fail miserably. 10 veteran cowboys positioned themselves outside the fence, gripping fiberglass sorting sticks with knuckles white from anxiety, sweating despite the bitter frost as they braced for what they assumed would be an unavoidable bloodbath. Yet, as the moment descended, Clara defied every expectation of how a ranch hand should behave in the face of imminent danger. She didn't carry a stick, she didn't crack a whip, and she didn't even step inside the dangerous confines of the round pen. Instead, she calmly walked up to the heavy iron gate, unlatched the rattling chain, swung the steel wide open, and did something utterly incomprehensible to the seasoned men watching. She took several deliberate steps backward, tucked her hands into her pockets, and simply stepped out of the way. Inside the pen, the massive white bull stopped his aggressive pacing, his head swinging toward the open gate as he measured the silent young woman and the sweeping curved alleyway. Driven by an absolute lack of human shouting and predatory pressure, Brimstone's primary emotion miraculously shifted from explosive aggression to simple curiosity, causing the beast to voluntarily step through the gate and walk down the curved alley. Tricked by the solid walls into believing he was safely escaping, he reached the dead-end box where his prey instinct screamed at him to instantly pivot and retreat. The moment he spun around, Clara's architectural illusion aligned him perfectly with the squeeze chute, and he walked himself straight into the trap, allowing Dr. Shaw to throw the heavy lever with a resounding clack. As the veterinarian stared in breathless disbelief, this silent victory fundamentally subverted the foundation of American Western mythology, where the hero is expected to achieve victory through a loud, intensely physical showdown. By conquering the ranch's greatest terror simply by stepping out of the way, Clara brilliantly demonstrated that true mastery over nature is never about dominating it with brute force, but about possessing the profound wisdom to understand its natural flow. But catching that monster was merely the spark that ignited a much larger revolution, proving the most earth-shattering changes on a ranch don't happen in the corral, but inside the corporate ledger. Following that silent victory, Silas Vance granted Clara unprecedented authority to orchestrate a systemic overhaul of the property, tearing down decades of aggressive straight-line architecture to implement sweeping curved facilities. The results were an absolute revelation. Within a single quarter, injury rates among veteran cowboys plummeted to 0, and the grueling time required to process a herd was miraculously cut in half. Yet, the most profound discovery was entirely financial, providing a masterclass in the economic reality of animal welfare. By drastically lowering stress in the livestock, Clara eliminated the costly phenomenon known as dark cutting, where severe panic and adrenaline permanently ruin the pH and color of the beef. She proved that empathy is not just a soft, moral talking point. It is a direct, quantifiable economic driver that yields vastly higher profit margins than fighting nature ever could. Armed with this undeniable data, Marcus Thorne, the arrogant corporate manager, now had no choice but to carry a new stack of spreadsheets into the owner's office, drop them onto the oak desk, and humbly utter the words he swore he never would. I was wrong about the bull. But the greatest revelation didn't happen in the dirt or on the spreadsheets, because this story was never really about taming a dangerous animal. It was a devastating mirror held up to a blindly stubborn world. The very next week, Clara Hayes was officially promoted to head foreman of the Cross-Iron Ranch, taking full command over veteran men who had been working cattle longer than she had even been alive. Watching Brimstone calmly walk into the chute, the cowboys realized the massive bull was never broken, malicious, or inherently dangerous. The ranch's aggressive system was simply entirely incompatible with his true nature. This realization transcends the dusty confines of agriculture, transforming into a deeply powerful metaphor for leadership, parenting, and navigating complex human relationships. We live in a society that wrongly believes when someone is acting out, resisting, or failing, the only viable solution is to yell louder, apply more pressure, or push harder until their spirit is finally broken into submission. Yet, true mastery teaches us a beautiful lesson. When faced with an immovable force, the answer is rarely to fight it, but to step back, change the shape of the room, and be quiet enough to let them find the open door on their own. If this story changed your perspective, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments, what exactly is the brimstone in your life right now?